There are many good ORMs out there for Python, but they're generally missing one thing, and that's async support. Async is a relatively new concept in the Python world, and it's just taking its time to get into mainstream ORMs. An ORM is designed to help your application talk to its database, making the models and rules, safely managing them, consistently avoiding the pitfalls of writing your own queries. They do have some downsides, but generally it's clear and obvious choice. The popular ones like SQL Alchemy and its Flask fork, along with Django ORM, are widely used and supported. While SQL Alchemy does have async support since version 1.4, I always like to check out other options to see what's out there outside the usual suspects. So Tortoise ORM is a relatively new project that caught my interest because, being a Django user, the format and the way that the code works look very similar, and the Tortoise devs even cite this in their docs. It also comes with async support for the two main databases that I use, which is SQLite for hobby projects and Postgres for everything else. Initially, I was quite curious and a little bit concerned about the async SQLite part, as I was fairly sure that the main drawback of that database is that it only allowed one writer at a time and very little to no concurrency. There was locks and all sorts of things going on, which means that it just wouldn't work in an async world. However, once I read a bit more and I looked at the package AIO SQLite, I realized I was actually looking at the problem the wrong way. The limitations of the database are still going to be in place. There's still that writer lock, there's still going to be issues with very large data sets, but the async package allows the read and write commands to fit inside the async IO event loop without blocking the other coroutines. So if we read the package docs, it explains it here a bit better. AIO SQLite allows interaction with SQLite databases on the main async IO event loop without blocking execution of other coroutines. It does this by using a single thread shared per connection, which executes all actions within a shared request queue. So connection objects are proxies to the real connections and cursors are the same, and it provides async iterators to query results. So what this means is we can essentially use async for our entire program and still use this database. So one thing that I always like to look for when I'm choosing something, a new package or a new framework to learn, is the documentation. I always kind of think that if you're proficient enough in a language, the official documentation should be enough to get you started, and it certainly is in this case. There's loads of clear examples, how to work with things, what you need to do to get started. We can see here the examples for getting it working with Fast API, which is a really popular up and coming framework nowadays, written on top of Starlet, along with an example for ASYNC, which is one that I use myself, and I'm going to have a video coming out on that soon too. There's also an example section on Pydantic. So Pydantic is a popular Python package for data serialization and validation. In fact, I did a basic video on that not long ago, which I'll put a link to somewhere if you're interested. What it means is that we can actually put Pydantic in with our Tortoise ORM using its Pydantic model creator to make our code much neater and more succinct, whilst getting those benefits from Pydantic. So let's have a quick look at the example that I created, and I'll run you through some of the things that I did, and I'll show you a working example. Just before we get to the code though, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. For those of you that don't know, Skillshare is an online learning community that will help you explore your creativity and inspire you to learn new skills. If you're like me and you love to learn new and interesting things, then you're really going to enjoy the depth and breadth of topics covered. Plus, with new premium classes added each week, there's always new and interesting things to put your mind to. As someone who makes programming videos on YouTube, I often struggle to keep them engaging, and I'm always looking for tips and techniques that filmmakers use to keep their content engaging and watchable. So I watched Filmmaking for All: Tell Your Story Through Video by Dan Mace. Dan is a fascinating character who worked with Casey Neistat, and I really enjoyed this concise course about telling a story through video. For me, this sort of content is what Skillshare is all about and why I enjoy it so much. So if this sounds interesting to you, then the first 1,000 people to use the link down below will get 1 month free trial of Skillshare. Thanks once again to Skillshare, and let's get going. So this is my basic API that I created with ASYNC using Tortoise. So you can see here right away that when we import it, we actually have a specific ASYNC import that we can use to actually register the ORM with the app instance. So here's my app instance, and if I scroll to the bottom, I have the register tortoise function that attaches it to the app with the database URL, as you would expect to see in many other ORMs. We attach the models module and we say true to generate schemas, and that's all we need to do to actually get it going in this instance. I have a models.py file, and here's where you'll see how they look very similar to Django. So we create a class of model, and then we write out the fields that we want and specify field, and then in this case most of these are a char field apart from these two, the date and the int. The pk will be the primary key is equal to true, and again, just like Django, we have auto now is true, so every time we were to add an instance of product, it would automatically generate the date and time of that was created. We also use this string representation to get that out here if we need it. Now I only have this one model in here. I'm not using users in this case, but you absolutely would have your user model in here too. Unlike in Django, obviously, where that's created for you. I also created a toDict method inside this model that basically gives me a dictionary returned when I call this on it. What this will do is it means that when we actually ask for the information at the API endpoint, I can call it on toDict and I can just return it out of my application as JSON. So as you can see, it's really easy to get Tortoise Go up and running in a simple project. This is the ASYNC version, but as I said, there's Fast API and other ones available too. Plus, you could just put this in any application or program that you wanted. As I stated at the beginning of this video, this is a relatively young ORM, but I think it looks really promising. I like what they've been doing with it. I like the Django-like models, and there's, despite a few drawbacks like some time zone issues and maybe some data serialization and migration things that are still to come, I think it's definitely worth checking out and looking into, especially for most of us who are writing just smaller applications, where things like this might make your life just that little bit easier and make your code base a little bit lighter. If you want to grab some data to try with your new Tortoise ORM and your application, you're going to want to watch this video right here.